This is the big news coming in at this hour. President Donald Trump has taken to social media to say that he has had a chat with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin this evening to end war in Ukraine. Trump said that he spoke to Russian president and the talk lasted for quite some time. Russia and the talks have been around Russia-US prisoner swap. He said that peace talks should start immediately, and apparently that the Russian president has also agreed to start negotiations. Trump said that he will inform Zelensky of the talks and have thanked Vladimir Putin for releasing Mark Fogel. My colleague Vishnu Shom is with me right now for more on the story. Vishnu, what really now does this mean to Ukraine? They have been on the receiving end. They have suffered invasions by Russia. President Zelensky, it seems, is merely being informed of this conversation.
Well, Rika, let me tell you what this is. This is what we have hoped for now for the last several years. This is the beginning of the end of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and one can only hope that the peace process that President Trump speaks about actually goes through. What he has said after a conversation with Russia's President Putin is that, and I quote, "We both agreed we want to stop the millions of deaths taking place in the war with Russia-Ukraine. President Putin even used my very strong campaign motto of common sense. We both believe very strongly in it. We agreed to work together very closely, including visiting each other's nations. We've also agreed to have our respective teams start negotiations immediately. That's critical. And we will begin by calling President Zelensky of Ukraine to inform him of the conversation, something which I will be doing right now. I've also asked the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the Director of the CIA, and others to lead the negotiations, which I feel strongly will be successful. Millions of people have died in a war that would not have happened if I were president." Now, I was in Kiev a couple of months back, and I asked President Zelensky this very question. What would happen if President Trump came to power and if the U.S. was no longer willing to endorse the war being fought between Ukraine and Russia? To which he said at that stage that there were no clear signs that Trump would necessarily do that, and that on the basis of conversations with the Republicans, he hadn't received any such signal. Well, this is the signal, and this is the signal very clearly that America wants this war to end. Remember, it is America's support that Ukraine has relied on most heavily. America has been arming Ukraine in this war. The Ukrainians were invaded by Russia. Their territory was taken over, large parts of it. And even though the ultimate goal of the Russian invasion, which was to have a regime change in Kiev, was not achieved, the Ukrainians did suffer immensely, of course, as did the Russians. Millions of Russians have lost their lives. The Ukrainians have gone north into the Kursk region. But ultimately, the battle is in the east of Ukraine, in the Donetsk and the Luhansk region, and in the south of Ukraine, in the Crimea. These are areas where the Russians have been pushing west, and the Ukrainians have been trying to repel them. Over the last couple of months, we've seen the Russians make considerable gains, albeit small gains, in the east of the country. However, that has come at enormous cost to the Russians. Russia had to rely on its allies, including North Korean soldiers, to actually keep the Ukrainians at bay. But ultimately, it's been a slow, degrading war industrially, militarily, and ultimately in human lives for both sides. On the one hand, it's been a very high-tech war, the use of drones, the use of extremely advanced missiles on both sides, but on the other hand, trench warfare as well. That we've seen perhaps at this level for the first time since the Vietnam War. At the end of the day, I should mention that this is one of the most costly wars in terms of the loss of human lives since the Second World War. And if this is an indicator that it's going to now start to end, that is absolutely crucial. One final point over here, the Ukrainians have to accept this. President Zelensky has so far rejected any effort to end the war. So it is critical that the Ukraine accepts this in order for there to be peace.
Absolutely. It is critical that Ukraine accepts this. Thank you very much, Vishnu, for joining us on the broadcast. We're also joined by David K. Johnston, Professor of Public Policy at the Rochester Institute of Technology. We're joined by Fred Weir, senior journalist from Russia. He is an expert on Russian affairs. Fred, good evening to you first. How is the Russian media reacting? It's a big news that we are reporting at this hour. President Donald Trump having spoken to Russian President Vladimir Putin and said that negotiations about stopping the war in Ukraine has to start immediately.
It's a little bit early to gauge the Russian media response. This is like very, very recent news, but it is momentous. The fact that they've had an acknowledged phone conversation and that they have decided to talk directly, Putin, Trump, visit each other's countries. I think this is quite astonishing. I'm in the camp of people who would be skeptical of the possibilities of any quick breakthroughs. I think the Russians are quite adamant that they will not go for a ceasefire. They want a comprehensive end to the war. One that would be legal and, a settlement that will be lasting. Also, they aren't going to compromise on their idea that the Ukrainian regime has to be not only neutral, but demilitarized. The main reason they went to war was not for territory, but to change the nature of the Ukrainian state. And I don't think they're going to give up on that. But the fact that these negotiations are going to happen, and the fact that Trump and Putin decided to do that between themselves, and Trump is now going to phone up Zelensky and tell him so, shows that there is going to be movement, and this is really hopeful.
David K. Johnston, how do you react to what our guest just said, Fred Weir, that Russia may not accept a ceasefire?
Well, I think the Russians have, in fact, been very clear that they're not interested in a ceasefire. And I think from the point of view of the Ukrainians, the question is going to be, why should they give up any of their territory, especially since Russia in 1993, in a treaty, pledged to never invade Ukraine if it would give up its nuclear weapons and turn them over to Russia. I think that, well, it would be good to end this war. That's the number one value, to end this war. The signal it may send to people who want to expand their territory, President Xi, for example, in China, is the U.S. will not stand and protect people who are the victims of aggression and illegal warfare. That's the downside concern.